What's happening, guys? Mixed by Jocelyn here, back for another episode of Mixed Up. And today I'm going to be doing a highly requested video and I'm going to be breaking down my mix template. And to sweeten the pot as well, I've put it up for sale on my website for $19.99. The link will be below. It's only going to be that price for a certain amount of time. So make sure you hit the link below and make the most out of that offer. Let's go. Boom. Okay guys, so here is my mix template. I've spent years and years crafting and tweaking this to get it to the place that it is today. There's a bunch of different techniques that I've taken on from different engineers like Jason Joshua, TZO, people like that. All of the information that I've learned over the years of being a professional in the industry. Also just creating a workflow that I think works best for me and I believe will help you guys as well improve your mixing and your workflow. Because, you know, really when it comes to mixing, a lot of it is, for me, it's about the workflow and making life as easy as possible for yourself to achieve the best mixes. So for me, having a template where a lot of my go-to plugins are already there, the buses are set up, the tweaks inside of the plugins, you know, like presets and stuff like that that I use are already loaded in. It takes away those thought processes for me and allows me just to think exactly what I need to do for the mix, having it all laid out like this. But enough talking, let's break down into it and I'll explain as I go why I have these things in here and why I think it will help you guys improve your mix. And as I said below, if you wanted to try this out for yourself, the link will be below. It's on a sale at the moment for $19.99 at the date of this video coming out. I'm not sure how long I'm gonna keep that sale on for. Make the most of it, grab it. It helps support me and the channel as well. And you know, I wanna give back to you guys and hopefully improve your mixes. So when you open up the template, this is what it's gonna look like. The template is for Logic Pro. Let me know in the comments if you want the same template for other DAWs. I'll be able to recreate it probably for Pro Tools, things like that. If there's enough of you that want it, I'll happily spend the time and make the template for you guys. But this is what it's going to look like for Logic Pro. Obviously, when you download it, you're going to have a Logic file. It's going to come up like this. And then what I would highly suggest is you click File and then go over to Save as Template and then save it as your own template. Then the next time you want to open it up, you can open up from your template and it will come up exactly like this. If you start to mess with the template the moment that you open it, it's not going to look the same the next time you open it. So just make sure the first time you open it, you just go straight to File and then save as a template, so then you don't have to worry about making unnecessary changes from that point. Firstly, we have in the chain, when you look here, you see we have a few tracks already laid out. There's a couple of subbing folders as well. First, we have the demo. Basically what this is here, this would be where I drag in my demo mix when I receive my stems. I would then find out the tempo of the record from this point, put that in, and then lock that in before I start changing anything else. It's super important to make sure your tempo is locked in before you start mixing. And then on here, nothing really crazy. Most of the time I end up muting it after I've started because I actually put my demo track into a different plugin, which I'll explain later on, which is in this template. But the one thing that I do have on here is a plugin called Mixed In Key. Now, obviously, if you don't have any of the plugins that come with the template, you can swap them out for different plugins. Like, you know, a good plugin to swap out for this Mixed In Key would probably be if you go into meterings and you put the tuner in, because basically this is just going to find the key of the song and all the notes and stuff like that. So it helps me figure out the key. So if there's any like auto tune or if I need to tune the bass or the kick drum or whatever, I can do it relatively easy. And then straight away I have the key there, it's locked in, tempo's locked in, everything's good. So that's basically why I have the demo track there. Secondly, I have a 2-track here. This is just in case for whatever reason we couldn't get the beat stems for the project and you're just dealing with the 2-track. Then I have the section laid out here, and then I have a Pro Q3 laid out just in case I want to do some adjustments early on. A lot of the time I like to do a mid-side cut. So I'll cut the mids and then boost up the sides around the frequency that a lot of the vocals are going to be popping out, just to help create space. I've done videos on this. You can check out my channel of that particular technique, but that's why I have the Pro Q in there, nothing much else. Occasionally I might do a little bit more processing to it, but a lot of this template is just sort of like the basics to get you going, and then you'll take the mix in whatever direction the song needs to go in from that point. So that's the first 2 tracks. Not really that important, but they are necessary to have there and they're good just to have on hand with the plugins already in. Okay, let's get to the good stuff. So firstly, we have the drums. Now the reason why I have it laid out like this, where it goes drums, instruments, and vocals, and then the master, is because I like to mix in a certain order. So I like to start with my drums first, get the groove going, get the pattern going, do a quick rough mix of the drums, get everything feeling in the right pocket, get the vibe there, and then I'll move on to the instruments and then finally the vocals. That being said, obviously I will be flicking back and forth through the mix, hence why having it organized like this into different folders is super handy, because I can look at my project at a glance and know exactly where I need to be. So drums first. As you can see here on the bus, I have a couple of plugins. So I have Spectre here, and basically all of the plugins will come turned off. So you'll turn them on and off as you need them. I don't like to mix with any of the plugins on, but I have this band set up straight away. It's about a dB, and it's just giving a little bit of like saturation boost to all of the drums across the board. And I've turned down the mix to like 30%. Gives it a little bit of life. It's a technique, again, that I've sort of like picked up and developed from Jason Joshua. Yeah, that's why I have that set up there. Then we have Knock, which is a brilliant plugin by Decap. I have this here again, just in case I want to add a little bit of groove to it, a bit of saturation. I really like the plugin. It helps the vibe. So if I've mixed all my drums, and then normally I'll go back to this plugin once I've sort of like finished the first mix with everything in, and I'm like, okay, cool, maybe I need a little bit more punch from the low end, bit of saturation. It has a clipper in there, air, etc. It's all there, it's all laid out. So I like to have that plugin because it's a real quick and easy sort of adjustment layer after I've done the majority of the mix. Finally, I have the Shadow Hills compressor. This is the Plugin Alliance version. This will come laid out with the J pre, which is my version of the Jason Joshua preset that he has on his drum bus. And basically what you want to be looking for with this, how I see is a good indication, is once we have our drums mixed in, if we're getting about -1 dB of compression when the kick hits, we're in a good place, and it's going to feed in nicely later on in the chain, which would be our God particle and stuff like that. I feel like that's the sweet spot. That's going to be already set up for you as well in this template. And then as we open up the drums, you can see here I've basically got the basic drums already set up. So we've got kick, snare, clap, any perks, hi-hats, and a crash. Obviously, if your stems have more or less, you can use less, or you can just add more stems by, like, if it's got a couple of claps, you can just hit Command D, you've got a duplicate of that clap. I have plugins on most of these channels as well. So on our kick, we have an NS1 here. I have the NS1 on here for a few reasons. One, I feel like it does something to the transients. I'm not quite sure, but I do like the sound of it on a kick drum. And if the kicks, for whatever reason, are kind of noisy and stuff like that, if it's a live kick or whatever, I like to like cut out a bit of that room, a bit of that noise. So I have the NS1 on there. Then I have a simple Logic Stop EQ. This is just the top and tail it. If there's like any like top end clipping distortion on like a digital drum, I like to remove that, or just, you know, tuck everything in and basically make sure that I'm only getting the frequencies that I want out of each individual sound. Because if you're really disciplined with that when you're mixing, you'll be surprised just how much headroom you'll create by just top and tailing all of your stems properly. So that's the first EQ. Then I have a second EQ here. This is a Pro Q3. This is what I like to do if I'm just doing a bit of like surgical stuff. If there's any frequencies in the kick that I don't really like, I can just pull them down and just adjust nicely through that. I much prefer doing it with the Pro Q3 because it's a lot more versatile than the stock plugin, but I have the stock one there because I like to keep them separate from the top and tailing. And then, so that I know that's just doing top and tailing. And then when I look here, it's just taking particular frequencies out or boosting frequencies if I feel like it's necessary. Secondly, on the kick drum, I just have a light bit of compression. Again, you can change this. I like to use the isotope compressor for this, and I just have it really light, just slowly taking off some of the peaks, just giving it a little bit of compression, squashing some of the dynamics a bit if the kick, again, if the kick's live or whatever, and just helps bring a little bit more control using the attack and release. You can swap this plugin out with, you know, a Pro C2 or whatever you wanted, but for the purpose of my chain, I like to use this compressor. That's going to be a big theme. And then we have here the Gold Clip. This is brilliant. I would highly suggest using a clipper on your drums. Some people like to put them on the buses. I have them sometimes on the bus, sometimes on the individual drums. I like to have them on my kick. I like to shave off some of the top. I like to control the dynamics, and I like to bring loudness to it. This is a brilliant way of getting your kicks nice and loud. You can use really any clipper you want, but the Gold Clip is a brilliant, fantastic clipper. Another one that I've been using quite a lot is by the same company, which is the Orange Clip. I have a video of that, and you guys can check that out. But yeah, clipping is essential. This is the clipper that I use. This is brilliant, and it also offers like a payment plan if you did want to use it. But this has been a definite game changer to my mixes. It's more on the expensive side, but it's a highly suggested clipper. It's brilliant. And then finally, we just have another Pro C2 here, just in case I feel like at the back end I want to add a little bit more compression. A lot of the time I don't use this compressor, but it's there just in case you need it. Then we get to some of the more interesting style of stuff. So we have my parallel compression bus set up here. This is really kind of like heavy parallel compression. I like to squash the living daylights out of my kick and, and then run it in parallel, just bringing it in lightly. Just really helps give it that punch, really helps get the kick cutting through the mixes and creates a lot of energy in the mix. So that's my parallel compressor I use, a Pro C2 again. And then finally, this other bus here, but this is going to nowhere with no output. This will link up to my sidechain, which I have on my 808s. And basses, which I'll show you later. Anyway, so now we have the snare, similar thing. We've got a top and tail EQ. We're not going to spend too much time on all of this stuff. I'm just breaking it down for you. A Pro Q3 again, just to remove any sort of unwanted frequencies, tighten it up, make it sound nice. And then I also am feeding that into the parallel compression as well. With the clap, another NS1, I find a lot of claps can be a bit noisy, especially if they've been recorded live. Then we have a channel EQ and then a Pro Q3, and then I have a little bit of fresh air just in case the NS1 sometimes takes a little bit too much air out and I want to bring a bit more life back into the claps. That's then going into the parallel compression. Then we have the perks, again, just simple. Really, this could be anything coming into this channel. So I've just kept it really simple. Another channel EQ for the top and tail and a Pro Q3. And I'll probably be adding plugins on depending on what the perks are. Like they could be bongos, they could be like room shots, it could be anything. So I kind of keep that one sort of bland in there. Then we have the hi-hats, channel EQ and a Pro Q3. And then I have this transient designer on here because sometimes, again, if they're live hi-hats or even some digital hi-hats, I feel like sometimes they can be loose, the sustains a bit. I like to pull the attack up and shorten the release just to really make them direct. And I feel like it brings energy to the hi-hat and it helps it cut through a lot more. Then finally, we have the crash. Again, these sounds change so much. So it's just a channel EQ and a Pro Q3. Okay, that's the drums. So let's move on to the instruments now. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting. On the instrument channel, I just have a Pro Q3 set up here. Occasionally, I might add some compression, but just as I start, ones that I will always use, Pro Q3 probably. So keep it there. It's ready to go when we need it. Then we have the 808s. This is probably what a lot of you have come for. So we have here, this does change sometimes, really depending on the 808, but a lot of these plugins, they're going to be similar versions of these plugins. As I said, all of these plugins are here to be swapped out. This is just to give you a good base layer and an idea of how I mix and a good place for you to start and then adapt this chain and adapt this template into your own template and your own mix style. So we have a channel strip EQ just to do top and tailing again. Another Pro Q3 just because I do find a lot of 808s have a lot of unwanted frequencies that can be muddying up the 808 or things that are popping out too much. So I use the Pro Q3 just to surgically tidy all that stuff up. Then we have the soothe. Now this is an interesting technique. Again, we're going to have basically the kick is going to be feeding in. So it's already set up here through the side chain. And then I have my settings set up so that every time the kick hits, it ducks the same frequencies that the kick is hitting in the bass or the 808. So it allowing us to get that space that we need from the 808, however short or fast you set it. Mine's very fast and quite a fast release. So it's just a split second instant that the kick ducks the 808 and it's only in those frequencies. So not like a normal compressor like sidechain where it ducks everything and you can really hear the whole bass just go woo. It will just duck the same frequency that the kick is hitting. And then basically that allows us to still feel the bass and the 808 feel present in that moment, but it allows the kick to cut through. So you can hear both. And then secondly, it allows us to not have this peak moment where the kick and the 808 are hitting at the same time and you really hit your master output with a lot of volume. It allows us to control that a bit more and maintain headroom. So it allows us to get the kick to come through, the 808 to come through, but not massively at the same time. And then the 808 will then tail out as soon as the kick's finished hitting. And it allows us to really get that big, loud body, but maintaining a lot of headroom. So this really is a game changer. Like this technique, if you don't have Soothe, I would highly suggest investing in Soothe, especially if you're going to be using my template to mix your records with. So a definite thing that I would suggest is Soothe 2 is brilliant. It's a game changer for bass control. It's not something that people use Soothe a lot for. There's normally like vocals and taming stuff, but in terms of side chaining for your kick, it's a brilliant tool. So that's Soothe. And now we have a multi-band that I've set up here. Now this is just for like big powerful 808s. I like to split it, sometimes have a little bit more of a tighter control in the very low ends, just making sure it doesn't sound muddy. And then I might open it up and push up the low mids of the 808 a bit more, just to make it a bit more aggressive. And that way I feel like it translates better on smaller speakers as well. So it allows us to kind of like control those bands a bit more and really get a big, loud, aggressive 808 that can be heard across all listening devices. That's my multi-band. Then I have some saturation here. This changes quite a lot depending on what I'm trying to get. Sometimes I won't use it, sometimes I will, sometimes I'll use a different saturation. But this has been sort of like a go-to saturator for me for a long time. Occasionally I might even use like a black box on it or something like that. But yeah, it's a very good saturator if you have this. And these are sort of like the settings. Occasionally I might change this to like a gentle saturation, warm tape, whatever it is. I'm just trying to get a little bit of life back into the 808 once I've done my first processing. And then finally, I have another layer of compression just in case I want to just tame a little bit more. This will probably be like maximum 3 dB worth of compression if I'm running this through. Quite tight and a slower release just to like build that whole 808 and get control over the whole 808. Occasionally we'll use this if I feel like I need it at the back end. The bass, it's going to look fairly similar, but instead I've changed the last 808 and the saturation. So I'm using Spectre on the saturation here because, to me, this might be like a live bass guitar or something like that. I might want to boost up around the low mids to maybe get the feeling of the strings moving or something like that and get a bit more drive there. This is a brilliant plugin for doing that because it gives us those like high harmonics pulling out. It adds those harmonics. And then finally, I have the LA2A, which I think is a brilliant bass compressor. It's wide, it's thick, it controls nice. And, the attack and release that it runs through it is just, it really does help glue the bass together and keep it like the feeling there. Doesn't over process it as well, and it does add a nice feeling to it. So that's why I use this. I believe this might be it was a free plugin at one point. I'm not sure if it still is. But definitely something to check out. Really good. If it's not free, you can get it on the Spark bundle, which is like $19 a month or something like that. And you get an unbelievable amount of plugins with that. A lot of them I'll be using in this template. So definitely worth it. Then we have here, this will be like the sample. So if it's like a drill track or a hip hop track, this will be where I put the main sample. We're going to try and speed through some of this so the video is not super long. But Pro EQ3 just to do any sort of like initial editing. I might add a channel strip EQ there as well. Then we have a multi-band because if it's got like a lot of low end in the sample, I want to add a band to the low end to tighten that up, have a tight attack, tightish release, and just get a little bit more control. And then I might open up the mids and the highs a bit more just to add a bit of space there. Then we have Fresh Air again, just in case I want to add a little bit more top end to the sample. If it's a bit drowny, if it's a bit like low endy, I can like pull out some of those highs. And then another version of the LA2A compressor on there as well. Guitars, they're going to look fairly simple. At this point, it's going to be more of the same thing, because as I said, this is just like the initial things that I will be using on a lot of these instruments to get it to a certain place. And then I'll start adding different plugins depending on the style and the vibe that I want to add. So maybe like some reverbs, delays, maybe different saturation, things like that. Chorus, could be anything, but this is what I'm going to be using a lot of the time. So similar one again with the piano. Then we have the horns. Now this is slightly different. I have the Pro EQ3 and then I have an 1176. And I have what's called the punch-in or the all-in, if I'm remembering that correctly, where basically you have all of the ratios put in. I have quite a fast attack and a slower release. And that basically creates like a really nice, tight, thumpy feeling for the horns. Like I like my horns to sound quite compressed, but very driven, especially when it comes to hip hop. This is a technique that I picked up from Mixed by Ali. Once I tried it, I was a little bit like, oh, really? I don't know about that. And then when I tried it, I was like, oh, I hear it. That is that hip hop horn sound that we're looking for. So as you can see, they're all punched in here. If I click one, they all punch out. To achieve that, basically you hit the bottom one and then hit shift and then hit the top one, and then they'll all punch in. This is a technique that's actually been taken from the original hardware. So it's something that you could do on the original hardware to really super drive the sound. So you're basically getting all of the compression levels like on top of each other. It's a very cool technique. Then on the strings, I don't tend to mess with my strings too much. I might EQ them a little bit, but I won't really add much compression. So I like my strings to be loose and dynamic and swell and come up and down. That's some of the sounds that can add the dynamics to the song to me. And I feel like if they're there, they should be doing that. So again, most of the time I'll just add a bit of fresh air just to help it boost above the rest of the sound, help it compete against some of the other sounds that we might have in the track. And then finally, I have this scratch here, which is basically any like effects that you might have, like a scratch effect, a riser, sirens, you name it, whatever. And then basically I just have a Pro Q3 and another compressor there just to control that. So that is the instruments. Then finally on this, well, not finally, because we still got to get to the stereo bus, but we have the vocal chain. Now on the vocal chain, the vocal bus, I have an NS1. So a lot of vocals do get kind of noisy sometimes, especially if they've not been recorded in the best environment. So I have that there just as a sort of backup. Then I have the black box. Now I'm a big fan of adding saturation to my vocals, depending on the record, but a lot of the time I will do this. These are sort of like the rough settings that I'll start with. I will tweak depending on how much I'm driving into the black box. And then I have the parallel pulled back a little bit because I don't like it to be totally consuming the vocals. So this is the black box. Again, another plugin by Plugin Alliance. Super, super, super good plugin. I use it all the time and it's day and night change my mixes. The perceived volume you can get from this is crazy. If you've watched my podcast, Mix Opinions, you probably hear me talk about this all the time. Then we have Spectre. Again, this is sort of like just bringing out any harmonics. If I feel like I want a little bit more brightness from my vocal, I can add it there. Maybe some low mids. Again, this is a nice place to have if you're doing like recalls and the client comes back and like, oh, can we make the vocals sound a bit brighter, a little bit more lively? Rather than going through and tweaking all of the different vocals, I can just boost this here 9 out of 10 times. I get the wanted effect that we're looking for. So yeah, that's really cool. And then lastly, we have the Shadow Tilt. I almost think of this as like sandpaper. This is just like the last smooth bit of compression. It just takes out some of those like peaky dynamics that can make the vocals sometimes sound rough and not polished. So a little bit of smooth compression on the vocal bus before it gets to the master, it really, really helps, in my opinion, of just controlling the vocals. And then the chain, all of these are basically the same. I've labeled them so you can put them in and you can then tweak from there. And they all have the exact same plugins on. So I'll just go through one. And this is basically just your starting point. I call this my cleanup chain, right? And then I'll go on and add all the textures and the tones that I want to put out on the mix and basically make it its unique creative vocal. I do not like having presets set on my vocals because every single vocal is different. Even the different takes can be different. A vocal is such a dynamic, constantly changing instrument. I don't like to have those sort of like presets from start to top to use because you're never going to be doing the vocal justice if you do that. You're not going to be listening to the vocal properly and you're not going to be making the right adjustments. So to stop me from doing that and hopefully to stop you from doing that, this is how I've set this up. And I really do believe spending that extra time on the vocals is important to do. What we have here is we have a channel EQ, top and tail, as always. Then we have a Pro Q3, which is going to be, a real workhorse for us. We're going to be removing a lot of frequencies that are unwanted. It's trying to smooth that out, dynamic EQ, you name it. I have videos on all of this stuff on my channel. Please check them out. But this is what you want to be using. And then we're going to be going on to our first stage de-esser. I tend to use the Pro Q3 to highlight exactly where the S's are because it's very good. You can visually see it. And then I will set this band here quite small so I'm not overly working the de-esser to the really, really detailed section where the S's are really, really prominent, and I'll adjust there. So that's my de-esser. And then finally I have a multi-band. I multi-band a lot of my vocals. I feel like it helps me get a lot of control, a lot of balance. You'll get recalls where it's like, oh, my vocals feel a little bit muddy. They feel a bit loose, whatever I feel like I can get them in a really good, tight, level place using multi-band compression. Maybe a tight low end, a more open, relaxed mid, and then like a tight top end where I might boost it but then have a high ratio so it's pushing back down when the S's are there, and we're going to get a really flat kind of vocal response there, giving us a brilliant foundation to then add all of our own plugins on top, like saturation, other types of compression, even auto tune, things like that. And then the buses I have set up here is I have a reverb bus set up with an EQ. I highly suggest you edit this EQ depending on the vocal that you're working on. This is like a mid kind of EQ with a lot of the highs taken out and a lot of the lows taken out. So it's just going to be sort of like hugging the mid range of the vocal. Depending on the vocal that you're working on, you might want it to be a bit of a brighter reverb or a bit of a darker reverb. So that's what I set up like there. And the reverb of choice is the Valhalla. If you're not using the Valhalla, what are you doing? This is a brilliant reverb. It's industry standard at this point. Everyone's using it. Definitely check it out. It's, you know, it's a super versatile and it sounds amazing in my opinion. That's the reverb. Then I have another reverb. I have the plate reverb by UAD. This is a brilliant plate reverb. I use this because I like to sometimes blend my reverbs, having different timings, different sounding reverbs. It creates a really nice sounding, unique room for the reverb to lay in. So I have this here. This sometimes doesn't get used. If it's like a rap vocal, I might not put it on there. I might just rely on the Valhalla. But you know, if it's like going into a chorus, I can then add this onto the chorus. It gives the vocal a bit of a different feeling and might make it sound a bit bigger, a bit more open. I do really like the sound of plate reverbs on my vocals. Then lastly on here, we have the H delay. This is just sort of set again. I will change this depending on the tempo of the record. If it's like, you know, 120, I might have it to 140. I might have it set to 108. If it goes anything past that, I might lower it to 104. This just helps me get a little bit of a bounce. I tend to have my delay on the vocal quite subtle. I just want to bounce in between the vocals. And then occasionally I might add a compressor on here to set up a side chain to the vocal. So like when the vocal is actually being sung, the delay is very, very low. And then the moment that they release the vocal, it opens up and you can hear it in the pockets. So that's what I have my delay set up for. Brilliant. And that goes pretty much across the board, you know. And then I'll be obviously affecting my ad-libs very differently to my BVs, to my mains, to the hook, you name it. So that's why I set up there. And then as I said, you can duplicate or change any plugins that you want in this channel. And then finally, I have my master as a physical channel on here. I use this mostly for like automation. If I want to fade out the track at the end, I can use it with the master fader. And it just gives us a lot more control over that rather than having to like fade out each individual track if we're doing a fade out or a fade in or whatever it is. And it allows me just to be able to edit the master as a whole. So that's why I have that there. And it just, you know, it's nice to have it there so you can see with the rest, like what we're sort of like feeding into it. And then on the stereo out here, our very last chain, I've done a video with this breakdown already on it. It's near enough the same, but we have, and I will mix in. So pretty much once I've started my mix, like once I've done a few of the drums, I'm gonna basically turn on my God particle straight away and start mixing into the God particle, using the indications, using the metering, making sure I'm in a good place and leaning into it as I mix through it. This is going to allow us to make sure that, you know, a lot of the time people will do their fantastic mix and then slap a limiter on it and it ruins the whole mix. This is going to make sure that as we mix into our limiter, it allows us to hear exactly how it's going to sound in the final product. So I can't suggest this enough. The God Particle is a fantastic plugin. You've heard me rave about it a lot. So this is why it's on here. I mix into it and it sounds brilliant. Then as I sort of like come to the final stages of my mix, I might start adding the Shadow Hills if I feel like it needs a little bit more compression. Sometimes I don't even use it if it feels good to me. If I've mixed well into it, I won't need it. Then I have a black box. I do use this mostly to get a bit of perceived volume out of it, push it a little bit more. Occasionally I might swap it out and be like, maybe I'll use a clipper instead to get a little bit more volume, and I might use the gold clip on there. But this is sort of like the settings that I have to get that sort of loudness out of it. Then we have another course of Spectre. If I feel like overall, you know, if I'm referencing it on my Apple headphones or my Avaton or whatever, and I feel like, it sounds a bit dull in some of those speakers, I can like boost up the mix as a whole using this plugin. I do like this on my master out. And then finally, this is one of the goated plugins that I use. And this is where I'd put my reference. If you want to know more about this, I have a video that I released last week on it, totally explaining this plugin from start to finish. We'll have a link below, but you can put your reference in there, have all your metering, and then we can actually see exactly how it's going to sound on all the different streaming services, including Instagram, Facebook, things like that. So it's super, super clutch. So right there in my master chain, I can basically make sure that every single use form or wherever playback it's going to be played through, it's going to sound great in. And so I have all the tools ready to go so I can make sure that my mix is 10 out of 10. That is basically my entire mix template. For me, this has been a game changer. As I said, I've developed this over a lot of years now. This is sort of like peak of where I found it, the best version of where I've got my mixes have been sounding absolutely fantastic recently using this chain. You can ask any of my clients, they've all been loving it. And I really, really hope that you guys will decide to try it out for yourself. I hope it, changes your mixes, improves your mixes, gets you new clients, makes all of your existing clients even happier. And yeah, as I said, for a limited time only, I'm offering this chain on my site for $19.99. The link will be in the description. If you do decide to download it and try it out for yourself, send me a DM. Let me know how you get on with it. Send a screenshot of you using the template. Tag me on Instagram. I'd really, really appreciate that. As I said, it really does help the channel out. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like. If you have any questions about the template or making any other templates in the future, leave a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe, because we're releasing videos like this on a weekly basis. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Safe.